This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
In an age of fake news and echo chambers where people can get their information from anywhere they want, the journalism industry is a far cry from the one in which Bob Linden cut his teeth. Statistics Canada released a report in June showing that in 2023, 59% of Canadians have a high level of concern over online misinformation. That same report states only 47% of Canadians have a high level of trust in the media. Linden is a retired radio reporter, editor, and news director whose career spanned from the early 1970s to the late 2010s. His captivating voice and passion for stories were a staple for listeners of CKWX Radio, what is now known as 1130 News Radio Vancouver. Linden came of age in a time where truth and objectivity were paramount. He remembers when facts and facts alone led the discourse, and therefore public trust in the media and similar institutions was high. Linden still actively consumes news and is open about the problems he sees plaguing the industry. He was kind enough to speak with me over the phone, where we started the conversation with his foray into journalism.
My mother was always a big broadcasting fan when I was a kid, and I'm so old that network radio was a big deal with Jack Benny and many other programs that were being listened to on the radio, the Lone Ranger and things like that. And it's much like the transition we're going through now of all of the previous media dying and everything moving toward the internet. The same thing happened. Radio died. All the advertising moved to television when I was young. And so it wasn't too much longer when I was graduating from high school that a radio course came open at CKLG in Vancouver. And I couldn't resist, and I signed up and trained for about a year and a half to become a disc jockey. Got my first job in radio in 1973, in June of 73, at CJIB Radio in Vernon, and I was the all-night jock on a rock station, and my dream had come true. However, my next job was at CFCW Radio in Alberta, in Edmonton, and they were playing very twangy country music. And all of the announcers on the station affected a sort of southern country accent even while they were playing this older country music. And I just couldn't do it. And a job came open in their news department not 2 months into the job. And I said I'd like to move over into news. And their news director was very amiable. He thought that I was young and smart, and so handed a pile of manila folders to me and said, this represents all of the towns and police departments and everything outside the city of Edmonton, and that's your beat. You can cover everything that happens there, and with one warning, if any story comes out of those communities and they end up in the Edmonton Journal newspaper before I hear it on this radio station, you're fired. Do you still want the job? I said, sure, so I took it, and that's how I began my career in news.
That's such an interesting backstory, especially how he pitched the job to you. So again, you've obviously been retired for a number of years, but you're still presumably a consumer of news and different forms of media. What do you consume? What captures your time and attention?
Probably the same things that are capturing the time and attention of people of every age right now. The thing that has changed in perception of what you're watching, and this is a very interesting question because people keep talking about how the media is changing, but really it's the audience who has been changing, and we're now living in a world where on the negative side, cliches have replaced facts in many cases. Think about that deeply, because, what do I know about Mexico? What do I know about France? What do I know about all kinds of subjects? And quite often, cliches tend to form, what we think of those places and things. And the same thing has to do with facts. We are very much less tolerant of time that it takes to explain anything. And that's why things have morphed into more how I feel about things as opposed to what I know about things. And so for me, when I'm watching, I'm from old school. My news training was in what was called the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, which is that, you give ample time to one side of an issue, ample time to the other side of the issue, and then you let your listener decide what they think is right or wrong. Now, people tend to want to listen to somebody who supports how I feel about the subject. And so we have what are now called opinion journalists, which is something that never, ever, ever would have occurred in the previous 6 decades. It would be unthought of because the listener was king. And now the listener is king, but in a different kind of way. We'll just sort of pander to the listener as opposed to work really hard and provide the facts as both sides see an issue, and you decide what's right or wrong.
And so I get what you're saying there. I think the counter argument that a lot of people would make to that is that you need, like, journalism, news stations, radio stations, they're ultimately a business at the end of the day. So how do you balance that need for accuracy and reporting and facts with keeping people engaged?
Well, here's the issue, is that I come from an era prior to the 1980s when news did not make money. News was a cheerful, happy loss leader for any company that ran news. News was run for respect. News was run for prestige. News was run because it was a public service. And that's why they called it the Fifth Estate. But in the 1980s, in the United States, Ronald Reagan deregulated media. And when he deregulated it, it meant that you could no longer be restricted to owning no more than 14 radio or television stations. You could own hundreds, heck, you could own thousands. And as a result, big companies were formed by billionaire Ted Turner, formed CNN. Rupert Murdoch from Australia created Fox News. And we had this new circumstance where news needed to make money. And as a result of news making money, the whole tone of news coverage and everything changed from that model that I told you about, where 30 seconds to one side, 30 seconds to the other, and the listener decides. Fox News, as a shining example, pandered to the conservative viewpoint, and as a result, they didn't have to give 30 seconds to the other side. In fact, they mocked the other side and pander to their particular listener, and they make money. So as soon as it became all about the money, even people on the left. Famously in media, we heard people decrying the fact that if it bleeds, it leads, and all kinds of other phrases were formed back in the 1980s because news had lost all respect, and that continues today. And so when it comes to having to make money with media, it is a loss leader. I would never ever say that news is something that would survive just on its own. This is why we have various newspapers collapsing. We have a broadcast media collapsing, especially television, because advertisers don't want to advertise things that nobody's watching. And that comes down to that whole attention span issue. We just want to hear what we want to hear. And so if you do want to make money, then go ahead, be one-sided.
Interesting. And so, Bob, I only have about a minute or so left of time here. With everything that has just been said, if you were to peer into your crystal ball for a second for me, what needs to change to improve the situation, to get news back the respect that it needs to still be that public service for people?
I really believe it's the miracle of trying to get your average listener, your average 24-year-old to say, I would really like a world in which skeptical journalists were asking an awful lot of questions. Yes, but where did the money come from? And all of that kind of thing. And answer questions that, you're not asking. And present both sides and be back to a world where I decide as a listener what's right and what's wrong. Because somebody just quoted yesterday the fact that September of 2025 was the demarcation line in the world where we finally, as a people, have decided that most of what we see on the internet is fake. And only for the reasons of getting eyes on the page. Something needs to happen that we sort of return to, but I'd like to know the truth, please. Where am I going to go and find it? And for that, it's going to be a trust issue, but it's also going to be an education issue where people have to understand that they need to think and be critical thinkers and have people who will find information for them that will give them something to think about. Right now, it's not that way at all. It's just simple yes or no's.
That's just fascinating. Bob, that's where we have to leave it, unfortunately, because again, I only have 10 minutes. I wish that we could produce a whole hour show with you, because I find these conversations endlessly fascinating. So yeah, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
I'm just glad I could give you your 10 minutes.
Yeah, by all means. I'm sure that you could have given me a whole lot more too. So I'm really, really thankful for that. For BCIT's The Crow, I'm Gabe Liesi. Thank you for listening to another episode of For the Record.
Last week, the McMillan Space Center Theater was filled with programmers, animators, and hackers for the first ever AI Film Festival. Luke Minaker, a longtime animator and creative director, screened his film Critical Seduction, a take on his own Playboy Dungeons & Dragons character.
You slept with the Crimson Countess? The homicidal noble we are literally here to rob?
Robbing is such an unimaginative word. Let's call it post-coital gratuity claim with hazard pay.
In a bright tavern, the 3D animated characters, a human, a demon, and an orc, make all the right facial expressions and gestures, showing outrage or smugness. Normally, such a feat would require an entire team of animators and cost thousands of dollars. Minaker made his film by himself for $100 in only 3 days, but he says it still wasn't easy. You actually said something really interesting when you were presenting it at the AI Film Festival, which is that sometimes you have happy accidents. I wonder if you could describe what that is for people who haven't played with AI.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different things. So in that particular one, there was a moment where one of the characters, Violet, a tiefling rogue, she kind of like she does this like little expression at the end that I totally didn't intend for. And it just like is so funny to me. It's just like weird kind of like look of disgust and irritation mixed together. And it just kind of like happened in one of the generations, and it wasn't even the best directed generation that I had, but I just loved that post line delivery of that expression. Like, I was going to just cut the rest of the clip off so that I have a really kind of snappy cadence between the characters, but the expression was so funny to me that I kept it in, and that was kind of one of those things that wasn't expected, that just kind of came up. but it just happens so often that the character is like, oh, that's not what I was expecting, but I actually really like that. And it often opens up avenues to explore. So like, I start with prompts that are really kind of light and generic, and then something will come up for one of the generations like, ooh, I really like that aspect, and then I'll start prompting with that aspect in as I continue to refine the image. So
it's interesting. It seems like there's like a bit of a back and forth between you and the AI. Like you're not just saying like, hey, make me this scene, and then it just spits out exactly what you want. Like it's an iterative process. Is that fair to say?
Oh, very, very much. It's an iterative and a collaborative process. So I really feel like, this is, and like I said, I've worked in directing for a long time, and it feels similar to a process working with an artist, and a character designer or set designer or whatever, and just kind of going back and forth. I'm like, oh, that's not quite what I was looking for. Let's change this. Let's change that. And so, but of course, AI is not quite as savvy as an actual artist. So I end up doing a lot more iterations. So, when I'm working on a Coca-Cola commercial right now, and it is I think, let's see, just for this initial shot that I'm setting up, I've already gone through about 50 generations, and I'm still not quite there. I'm honing in. I'm almost there. I'm going to have to I'm at the point now where I'm going to take it into Photoshop and do some final tweaks. But I've done like 50 generations to get it to the point where I really want it. And I think that's kind of key, is like, if you want to produce something that's not slop, you got to just like take it through its paces. You start to understand its limitations, and you just tweak the prompt over and over and over again.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
And I wonder too, I found an interesting section on your website that you have talked about balancing human creativity with AI. That's sort of like the AI can make suggestions and sort of take it in a certain direction. But then you have to balance that out. I wonder if you could just talk about the ethics and that particular problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, for me, ultimately, what I find is interesting is a bit of this narrative that AI creates slop and it's stealing people's jobs. And I feel like, okay, those two things can't be true. If it's only creating slop, then how is it stealing people's jobs if people don't like it, right? And so I think it does create a lot of slop, because there's a lot of people that are just, that don't have the experience to know how to put together a visual story very well. But I'm also now able to produce basically studio quality stuff that's indistinguishable from, the previous traditional methods. And so, but it takes a lot of know-how, and it's a whole other skill set to develop. And but it is also using a lot my experience to know how to tell a visual story, and like know what sort of shot I want to set up, what sort of how I want my characters to look, what the lighting rig setup is going to be, like all that stuff that I have much experience with is going into my prompts and into Photoshop when I take it in there inevitably, because I jump back and forth between Adobe's tools and also AI tools. So it's like it is a very involved artistic process. It's not just like, a lot of people don't understand, it's not just doing a prompt and then, oh, hey, I've got this and AI did everything and stuff. It is still a very iterative and artistic process. It's just a very different tool set and a very different paradigm in the way you actually do stuff. So
yeah, and how do you think people are going to adapt to this, or how is the animation industry going to change? As you're saying, it's a new tool set, it's a new skill set. What do you see happening there?
Yeah. Well, this is something that I'm actually quite passionate about and concerned about is I actually, I started in 1998, and around that time in the early 2000s was the transition from, this is when 3D animation started to become big. And in the early 2000s, especially, a lot of animators, hand-drawn animators, were out of work. And there was a really big transition towards 3D animation and things like Flash animation and Toon Boom, which is all digital. But a lot of these animators had to retrain. And I think we're in a similar space right now where animators are going to have to learn to retrain. There's so many different types of AI tools. It's not, a lot of people just think Midjourney and Stable Diffusion or Sora, but there's so many other tools and so many other modalities of creating with AI. You can still do 3D animation, like traditional 3D animation, but use AI tools to enhance how quickly you do that. And it takes away a lot of the kind of like rote stuff that nobody loves doing anyways. So, some people like really love to get, and there will always be a space for handcrafted animation. Absolutely. Just like, there's still space for 2D hand-drawn animation. Mm-hmm. But I think that's ultimately going to become more niche. As these tools just get so much better constantly. Yeah. So just going back to your question, we're actually hoping as a studio to offer retraining to animators to kind of understand how to use these tools and how to get prepared for this big shift that's happening in the industry. It's just at the very beginning of happening, but a lot of studios are looking at it, and it is really inevitable. So if you want to, I know a lot of people that are animators that have, lost their jobs and are now working at Staples or executive assistants or massage therapists, and that I'm hoping that I can help retrain some of those people so that, if they want to, obviously, so that they can come back in and use their artistic skills, because it really does, I think, take a skilled artist to produce quality entertainment, quality content. So we're hoping to do that. More to come, hopefully, in the new year about what that looks like. So
great. Thank you so much, Luke. I really appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.